Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Joining us now, Jesse Coburn, reporter at ProPublica, covering housing, transportation, cities, and infrastructure. It's a big portfolio, Jesse, and I would imagine most of the news not great.
Yeah, hasn't been a great news cycle for my beat recently.
But let's talk about specifically in terms of housing and what's been going on at HUD. HUD started off, it seems like their first agenda was to roll back any actions that they were doing to protect tenants or reverse discrimination. Just fill us in on that, or maybe even just give us a TikTok through the Trump administration up to this point.
Sure. So Trump nominated Scott Turner to be his HUD secretary. Scott Turner is a deeply conservative Republican from Texas who served in the first Trump administration on his Opportunity Zone Council in the White House. And, they wasted no time kind of implementing his vision for housing policy at HUD, massive layoffs at the agency. Pretty much right away, there are a number of DOJ staffers at HUD who were, implementing lots of reforms right away. The first wing of HUD that really took a hit was the Fair Housing Office. That's the part of HUD that investigates and enforces, housing discrimination and segregation laws. There are really steep cuts there, and
just to ask you, the fair housing, does that cover all housing issues across the board, private and public, or just specifically with any type of public housing or Section 8 housing?
Private and public. So, private landlords discriminating against their tenants, wanting to kick out a tenant because a woman is pregnant and wants to have a kid, or, mortgage lenders who refuse to lend in Black neighborhoods, or, cities that are engaging in wholesale segregationist policies. That's the sort of thing that part of HUD goes after. That work has really kind of ground to a halt under the Trump administration. They've shut down many major investigations into fair housing. I think that office's staff is dropped by half. They're sort of just really gumming up the works of fair housing enforcement. And then on the housing assistance side of things, recently, ProPublica obtained 2 proposals from the Trump administration, still unpublished, to dramatically change public housing, Section 8 housing vouchers, basically the nation's major rental assistance programs that serve some of the country's poorest residents by basically what the administration wants to do, we found, was to implement or to allow housing providers to impose pretty harsh work requirements and term limits on receiving that sort of assistance.
And so when we talk about HUD, those are the 2 functions basically it serves. It's either protecting people's rights in the context of housing or providing some type of housing assistance.
Yeah, I mean, they actually do a lot more than that as well. Those are the main functions. They also give out billions of dollars in grants to communities across the country for community development programs. They actually do a lot of disaster relief stuff, which most people associate with FEMA. HUD does a lot of that as well. The housing finance is housed within HUD as well. So, mortgage policy stuff, that's also happening at HUD.
I mean, I just want to note, just because of the irony of all of this, that Trump back in the 70s was sued by the DOJ for racial discrimination at his own properties. And
he had a consent decree.
Yeah. I mean, this goes back very, very deep into his political history, although the Republicans are all about this generally. But
that's right.
Go ahead, Sam.
All right. Well, let's walk us through the idea is, how do we kick, I mean, from their perspective, how do we kick as many people out of public housing or public housing support through a Section 8 program? How do we do that as much as possible without explicitly saying we're going to do that? I mean, that's sort of what they did with Medicaid as well. They pretended they're cutting undocumented people from it, and they're just cutting people from it. And so walk us through what they are, what those requirements, or I should say, what those levers they're going to use to eliminate the help that we give people in terms of housing?
Sure. So HUD has drafted two major rules that it hasn't formally introduced yet, but seems likely that it will, that would just dramatically overhaul how these federal housing assistance programs work. The first rule would allow public housing providers and private landlords that rent to tenants supported by things like Section 8 housing vouchers to require those tenants to work in order to continue to live in that federally assisted housing. And it would allow those housing providers to kick those tenants out after 2 years. So, if you live in public housing, you've been living there for 30 years, you might have to leave 2 years from now, and you might have to work full time in those intervening 2 years.
Okay, wait a second. So those are two separate requirements, right? You're saying you're only limited to public housing for 2 years, which is, anybody who's moved knows like there's a cost associated with that. Not to mention that there's no guarantee that you're going to be able to afford other housing. So these are two separate requirements. One is the automatic kick out after 2 years. And then the other is the work requirements. Let's take the work requirements. A landlord who's getting Section 8 vouchers can be in charge of assessing whether you are working or not. Yep. And that sounds like one of the most effed up things I've ever heard. Aside from, and we'll get into sort of the generic implications of so-called work requirements, but is this every member of a household? Is it just one member of a household? How does it work?
So the work requirements would apply to quote unquote work eligible adults. So basically, if you're elderly or disabled, you wouldn't know a housing provider could require this of you. And there are other smaller carve outs. If you're pregnant, if you're a college student, this couldn't apply to you. But for pretty much every other work eligible adult, and that includes, parents of children. So if you have a child ages 7 or older, this could apply to you. Also,
so wait, aren't we supposed to be encouraging stay-at-home moms?
Yeah, well, I think this administration, Scott Turner in particular, they strongly associate welfare with this idea of broken families, single-parent households, and this sort of culture of dependency on government assistance. And so I think that's really what they're targeting here.
And I just to paint a picture for people, because the overall numbers you cite in your piece are really horrifying. 4 million people could lose federal housing assistance under these two new rules. And for folks that are unaware, it's like what the average in terms of people's income, average family is making less than $20,000 annually. That is reliant on this federal assistance. So to Sam's point about moving, to all of these kinds of points about having a private landlord allowing them to see if you are working and having them come to you and they can evict you based on that.
Assessing your disability.
Yes. It's horrifying.
Saying that you're, I don't recognize the college you're going to. There's a whole, the amount of problems involved in that seems stunning to me. And these are all just these would all just be civil actions, I guess, on the part of the landlord, right? Or to just sue and then have the payments on Section 8 cut off. But I imagine we have an administration that's going to be very open to the idea of it being challenged and maybe even like a default agree with the landlord unless proven otherwise.
Yeah, and I think another thing you could see is states adopting laws that say, if you rent to Section 8 renters, or if you're a public housing authority in our state, you have to have work requirements. You have to have term limits. So you could see this sort of being adopted de facto by whole states. I
think you mentioned in your piece about this, Georgia's experiment with work requirements for Medicaid recipients. We've talked about it many times in this program, but just retell what they found with that experiment.
I'm actually not familiar with that experiment, but I did look a little bit into the research generally on work requirements in welfare programs. And apparently what researchers have primarily found is that they don't really effectively promote employment, but they are very effective at removing people from benefits. So they're good if they're good at kicking people off of benefits. They're not terribly effective at getting people who receive benefits to work more.
Well, all right. Sorry, I may have seen that somewhere else, but I'll just remind people that in Georgia, not only did it do the things that you talked about, it also ended up costing an extra like $600 million because apparently, there's work to be done to find out if somebody has work, so you need to build that apparatus. Where are we now, and how is the government shutdown going to affect things?
I think that these proposals are probably on ice for the time being. The big news out of HUD yesterday related to the shutdown was there is a massive banner across the HUD webpage that was basically blaming the shutdown on Democrats. I think that something that other federal agencies have been putting out as well, that sort of messaging. But they talked about introducing these requirements in the last Trump administration. They never got around to it. But I think the fact that they already have rules drafted this early in the second Trump administration indicates that they're serious about putting this through. And I just want to mention the second rule as well, because we haven't touched on it, which is targeting basically immigrant households receiving federal housing assistance. These are so-called mixed status families in which some members of the household are in the country legally and eligible for assistance, and others are not, either because they're undocumented or they have some other immigration status that makes them ineligible for benefits. HUD wants to kick all of those households out of federally assisted housing. So the way it's worked so far is that the government has allowed those people to be supported by federal housing programs, but it prorates the subsidy they receive so that the government is not actually providing any financial assistance to the undocumented family members. But now HUD is saying, no, we want all of those people to leave. And so under this other rule, those 20,000 families would likely be kicked out. 16,000 of those families are families with kids. So that's who this would be affecting. And as part of that rule, HUD also wants to require that anyone who applies for or receives housing assistance, anyone in public housing or Section 8, if they're a citizen, they have to prove it. So they have to either provide a birth certificate or a passport to show that they're actually citizens. And sort of to your point, Sam, earlier about the administrative costs of all this, it's going to create this massive bureaucracy and kind of red tape around housing assistance that experts who I spoke to think is going to result in a lot of people just being kicked off of their benefits simply because they don't have a birth certificate, or they don't have time to go get one or whatever, or it's going to create these massive administrative overhead costs for these public housing authorities who suddenly, are like the passport checkers of the whole federal housing program. So that's the other rule that's also in the works right now.
And this is all in the shadow of the Faircloth Amendment, which I still think does not get enough attention. The idea that we have had a cap on the construction of federal public housing since 1998 or 1999 or whatever, since it's been passed, these are, it's already a threadbare system, whether it's public housing or, Section 8 or what you're talking about, or the subsidization for some of these other privately held units and living spaces. There's just not enough public housing as there is, let alone what we're seeing in terms of them trying to kick people out based on racist and xenophobic ends explicitly with the immigration piece.
Yeah, and I think what's worth noting here as well is what its overall picture for housing is. I mean, if you look at the Trump budget proposal, they want to cut public housing, Section 8, these rental assistance programs by nearly 50%. They want to turn these programs into block grants, basically just hand them over to the states and say, you deal with it. So, their ambition is to dramatically curtail the federal government's efforts to help poor people afford housing.
And just to be clear, if I am a single mother of two, my children were born here in the United States. They are American citizens because we still have birthright citizenship in this country. I am undocumented, or my visa has expired, or I am still, at this point, people are getting deported even if they have documents and are in the process of applying for citizenship or applying for a green card or applying for any other type of visa. So I don't even want to say undocumented necessarily. The federal government gives me not three portions essentially of Section 8 funding, but two for the three of us. So we either have to live in a smaller apartment than would be called for an individual with 2 kids, or we subsidize it in some fashion. Everybody gets kicked out under this Trump proposal. These kids are essentially made unhoused.
That's right. And what's interesting about that is because the government isn't subsidizing everyone in those mixed households, those households actually pay more. And so by enacting this proposal of kicking out all the immigrant mixed households and replacing them with fully eligible households, it's going to cost the federal government like an additional hundreds of millions of dollars every year to provide federal housing assistance. So, for a government that is reportedly obsessed with cutting costs, this is actually going to dramatically increase costs for this administration.
Yeah, I mean, this is really just a way of cutting out this program and using, again, immigrants as the sort of like a selling tool. I mean, we're seeing this right now with the whole government shutdown.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly of a piece with, everything the administration is doing, on the issue of immigration and, and everything the administration has been doing in the housing space on immigration. I mean, HUD and DHS in March announced a data sharing agreement targeting mixed status households. Recently, the Washington Examiner, the right-wing news outlet, reported based on HUD sourcing, apparently, that HUD wants to demand that every public housing authority, there's like 3,000 of them across the country, identify all of the mixed households to it. So, there's been this sort of broad effort to identify all these families and so that it can kick them out.
Do we know if ICE has been sort of like ramping up its enforcement using the data they're getting from HUD?
I looked into that a few months ago and spoke to public housing authorities across the country, and none of them really described any uptick in ICE activity, at their, housing estates. I think it's maybe more of a practical issue than an ideological one. These mixed families, they're kind of scattered across the country. I mean, most of them are in California, Texas, and New York, but, within New York, there might be a handful here, a handful there. And so it's not really as efficient as, posting up an immigration court, for example, where that people who are coming through are going to, potentially have, immigration issues. There's also an issue of, if you're trying to enter someone's private apartment, they technically need to give you permission in order for you to be able to enter, unless you have a certain type of warrant. So it's much easier to nab undocumented people in public space, which is why I think we haven't seen large-scale raids in public housing yet.
Jesse Coburn, reporter at ProPublica, covering housing, transportation, cities, and infrastructure. We're going to link to your pieces on this HUD memo, and really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.